Hi, my name's Cecilia Poullain, and welcome to this episode of Brave New Women. All around the world, there are amazing, ordinary women doing extraordinary things. Brave New Women is about giving those women a platform and a voice, and it's about changing the way that women are perceived. And it's a way of inspiring all of us to do the things that we've always wanted to do. Today I'm sitting down to talk to Ros Cardinal. And Ros is based in Tasmania in Australia, and she's a specialist in change management. She's multi-talented, so she's a coach, she's a speaker, she's an author, she's a facilitator, and an organisational development specialist. And for her work, she's won numerous awards, including the Corporate Livewire Innovation and Excellence Leadership Coach of the Year in Australia. And her business, Shaping Change, has been a finalist in the Australian Small Business Champion Awards. She's also acted as president of the Tasmanian Women Chiefs of Enterprise International. And in 2006, she published her book, which is called The Resilient Employee. So an impressive CV, Ros, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Ros, you transferred, initially you trained and worked in HR, and then you transferred to become a coach. When was that and why was that?
Yeah, I guess it goes back to, I'll start at the beginning. My career in HR started in 1987, and I kind of worked through as a generalist HR person until probably about, it would have been early 2000s, and then I transitioned to learning and development. So from learning and development then grew into organisational development, and I was the organisational development manager at the company that I was at for about 7.5, 8 years. And that was where my interest in coaching kind of grew from, because OD is a very big portfolio. It covers all kinds of things in organisations, from organisation design to strategy to culture to, training and development's part of it. But it became fairly apparent to me fairly quickly that even though we were doing a lot of really big initiatives across the organisation and things like culture change and leadership development, but there really was a need for people to spend one-on-one time to really get a space to talk about what was happening for them in their leadership or in, what was happening in culture change for them, and giving people a space to feel safe, to be able to talk about the issues that they were facing in a very non-judgmental space. Particularly in corporates, there's often quite a competitive environment, and there's that sense that people don't want to admit weakness. It's all about, how do I present that really, brave face to the world that I've got all of this under control? And so the coaching space kind of grew naturally from that. It was one of those things where I started off with just, people saying to me, can I have a chat to you about what we just talked about in the leadership program? And it kind of grew into more formal coaching from there. So I probably would say I probably formally started coaching in probably about 2008 or so, 2008, 2009.
Mm-hmm. So was it different? So you left your role in HR and you became a coach. And was that transition difficult for you to become then self-employed rather than employed by a company?
Yes, I made the transition in 2012. So it wasn't probably as challenging as it might have been for some people, because I'd spent a lot of time thinking about it. So I'd picked up the coaching role inside the organisation I was in, and had really sort of honed the coaching skills there. And then I started picking up some external coaching work for other organisations. There was a big leadership program that ran here for the not-for-profit sector that invited me on as a coach, so I got to sort of play a bit in that space as well. So I had, made the decision to make the shift out of corporate about 2 years before I actually did it. So in 2010, I had a cancer diagnosis, which, obviously with something like that, it really throws everything into stark relief, I guess you could call it. And it was very much that sense of everything that I'd put off in my life, thinking I had plenty of time to do it. I suddenly realised that I might not ever get to do it. And obviously I recovered from it, but as part of that process, there was a lot of things in my life that I went, it's now or never. It's one of those things where I can't keep putting it off. So I'd known for quite a while that I'd had this call to step out of my corporate role and start doing something different in the coaching space. But, went through the cancer treatment in 2010. 2011 was really my year of consolidation, I suppose you'd call it, which is where I really did the market research. I had a look at what was out there. I looked at what other people were doing. I looked at what the demand was for coaching, how easy it would be to sell, all of those sorts of things. So I did a lot of the business development research, I guess, in that 2011 space, and then stepped out at the beginning of 2012. So I walked away from corporate with, I guess, already an established, not an established business, but already an established process. So I already had people lined up where I'd said to a lot of people, look, I'm leaving at the end of 2011, beginning of 2012. And lots of people had said to me, as soon as you leave, let me know because I'd love to do some work with you. So I had, I guess, a client base lined up before I made the leap, which I think made it a lot easier.
And what is specific about your coaching? What do you focus on?
I focus on, and my specialty is, I was actually saying to a client today, it's really human behaviour 101. It's breaking down human behaviour for people. So when people come to me with issues like difficult communication with somebody, for example, or the person I was coaching today, it was about her confidence as a leader. It's about unpacking it for them from a perspective of human instincts, of emotional intelligence, of, neuro leadership, that sort of thing, and explain what's happening to people in a very, through a scientific lens. So people kind of see it's not just me, it's just the way that humans behave. So, for example, I do unconscious bias programs where we talk about human instincts and how as a species we're incredibly tribal and it's built into us to reject people who are not like us. So to be human is to be biased. And people find that lens incredibly useful to them because it enables them to view it as it's not that it's good or bad, it just is. And how do we deal with that? And how do we recognise that we as individuals have biases and we can't help it? But then how do we bring those into the light and choose to do something active about it? So that's sort of being able to like I said, it's human behaviour 101. It's getting down to what does it actually mean to be human? And then how can we look at all of the things we do in workplaces and in business based through that lens of what it is to be a human being? Because a lot of the structures and a lot of the way that we've designed work is quite contrary to normal human behaviour. We're expecting people to do things that don't come naturally to us as humans. Even things like team structure, when people tell me I've got 25 people in my team and I'm managing them all, I know that's not going to work because natural human family size is about 7 people plus or minus 2. Anywhere between 5 and 9 is a really good team size. You make it bigger than that and it segregates into multiple teams within that. And also as a leader, you can't give 25 people the attention that they need. And so then people start to feel neglected and that eats away at their self-esteem and their ability to deliver. So it's that kind of stuff. I think that's the bit that I really love and the really interesting part about my job is getting to work in that field.
And are there other examples you've got of the way that work is not adapted to us as human beings?
Probably a great example is performance management and performance review systems. So humans are hardwired to perceive feedback as a threat. We're hardwired for negativity. So we actually, place much more value and more thought on a negative construct than we do on a positive one. So when we sit people down and we put them in a room and we shut the door, people feel trapped. And it's that sense of now I've got to sit here with the door shut, which feels like I'm trapped in a cave, to talk to you about my performance. And you're going to tell me something I don't want to hear. And then I'm listening for the negative. So you can tell me all these amazing positive things. And all I'm hearing is the one negative thing you said at the beginning. And then I walk out of there with my self-esteem flat. And we've also had a conversation about how I can, what's on for the next 12 months for me. And what development do I need? Where do I see my career going? And I can't think about any of that because my brain's just stuck in this sort of, you told me something tiny negative about my performance. So one of the things I quite often say to clients, okay, actually, I'll give you an example. I had a client who said to me, I've got somebody working with me in my team who has been severely traumatised in a previous role. She's terrified of performance reviews, and this particular organisation did performance conversations every 2 weeks. Every time I get her in a room to talk about a performance, she collapses in tears and I can't do anything with it. I don't know what to do. I'm at the end of my rope. I can't give her any feedback. I just want to tell her she's doing a great job, but she cries every time. And so I explained this to her about, how humans work. And I said, look, take her out of the office environment. Go do something else. Go get a coffee. And she called me back a few days later and she said, I took her out and we bought a takeaway coffee and we walked around the park. And she said it was absolutely amazing. We had the best conversation. We talked. She gave me feedback on what she thought I could improve. She actually confessed to things that she thought she could do a lot better. And we had this amazing, amazing conversation. She said, I can't believe how just taking her out of the office worked. So I guess that's probably a really good example of, how we've structured things to just not work with humans. humans are our natural habitat. We give each other constant feedback. We're constantly talking about our lives and what's going on, how things are working and not working. We problem solve on the go. And then we bring that down to we've got to discuss this twice a year, 6 months and 12 months, and document it and write it down and do it in a room with the door closed. And it just so doesn't work for people.
And so are you working with individuals within an organisation, or are you also working with organisations to change the way that they work so that their organisations are more adapted to us as human beings?
Both. I tend to do a lot more work with individuals at the moment, simply because, there's a lot going on in the world at the moment, and a lot of organisations don't have the headspace for it. So I'm still doing with organisations doing the work in the strategic planning sector, for example. We're doing quite a bit of that, doing a little bit of culture work, but nobody's kind of taking the leap into really addressing culture at the moment. I have had some really amazing conversations with organisations, though, about remote work and how to set that up in a way, remote and hybrid teams, in ways that actually work for humans, not against them. Because it was fascinating, actually, when we sent everybody home from work it was about March last year. The key things my clients were concerned about was how we're going to make sure that people are working when we're not looking at them. You're not in front of me, I can't see what you're doing. And then as it sort of evolved over the next month or so, it switched very much to conversations about how do I stop my people from working so hard? Because they won't stop, and they've got their laptop, they'll log on after dinner to just finish writing that report, and people are working crazy hours because everyone dug deep and put in, because there's very much the sense that we're all in this together as organisations, and how do we actually make this work for us? And now, we've got organisations that have said they're not taking people back to the office, they're going to keep working at home. And then the trick is, as humans, again, because we're hugely connected as a species, how do we keep the connections going when we're not seeing each other? And that's the work that I've been doing quite a bit now with individuals, and starting to talk a bit more in the broader organisational context, but this thing of how do we actually stay connected when we're not physically with each other like we prefer to be as humans? How do we utilise things like Zoom, like Teams, the video conferencing type of systems to create a like face-to-face environment? So for a lot of leaders, the advice I've been giving them is things like whatever it is you would normally have done in the office, see if you can replicate it. So if you used to go to the pub for a drink after work on a Friday afternoon as a team, get everyone to jump on Zoom together and just have a glass of wine and have a chat. Mm-hmm. If you used to go and do quiz nights, still do them, but do them on Zoom. And for leaders, I've got leaders who, been going for walks at lunchtime, and I've said to them, look, ring up one of your teammates, like have one person each day, and both of you get on the phone and go for a walk in your separate suburbs and just chat while you're walking. So it's making a really big effort to keep the connection going. That's going to be the key thing. Remote work can absolutely work. We've shown that. It works brilliantly. A lot of people love it. A lot of people don't want to go back to the office. But the key thing is, how do we maintain culture, particularly around connectedness of people when we can't be face-to-face?
Mm. And when you say that you're looking at how organisations work on the basis of us being human beings, where does your knowledge and understanding of what we are as human beings, has that come from a particular type of teaching, or is that something that you've worked out yourself, or where has that come from?
It's been from a whole range of sources. So I study extensively. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to people and how people work. So I've done a number of accreditations. So the human instincts piece comes from a company called Hardwired Humans. I did their accreditation quite a few years ago. And that was really instrumental in helping me out really start to think about why people do what they do. I've done accreditations in human behaviour and in emotional intelligence and political intelligence, which is another really interesting facet of it. And a lot of it's been through coaching and just observing people. Like I've debriefed thousands of people. I've coached, hundreds, probably thousands of people now. And each of those interactions and each of those conversations, I guess, adds to the body of knowledge that I'm developing. I also just recently finished a neuroscience certification so I'm a certified neuro leader and neuro coach. But that was really interesting because it helped me understand from a brain perspective what's actually really going on. So,
and can you tell us more about that from a brain perspective?
It was a really interesting piece of study. So it's kind of neuroscience 101 for people who aren't neuroscientists, but it was understanding how the brain works and how that impacts things like productivity, like how to actually work with your brain instead of against it. And there were some things that I kind of already knew, but it was really nice to have them explained through science. Things like your brain can only run for about, only focus for about 90 minutes before it starts to run out of go juice. And there's a reason for that. It's because it's using a lot of energy. Our brain uses 20% of our body's energy every day. And that having a short break and doing something completely different and then coming back to the piece of work again re-energizes that focus. And in terms of productivity, people like Steve Jobs was a classic for always wearing that black turtleneck that he used to wear and jeans. And he did that very deliberately because it minimised the amount of decisions he had to make in the day, because your brain can only make so many decisions. So you save your brain power for all the important stuff. So
I've heard Barack Obama say the same thing. He just has grey and blue suits.
Yep, makes it easy. Always wears the same socks. And even things like laying out your clothes the night before so you don't have to make that decision in the morning. Always decide what you're having for breakfast the night before so you don't have to make that decision in the morning. That kind of stuff. I mean, the things that, a lot of people already kind of know or you've heard of or read of, but having it explained through a neuroscience filter was really interesting. And, actually what happens and things like how memories are formed and, how we recall information and things like that. It's been very, very interesting. I've loved it.
Mm. And do you have group programs as well as working with individuals?
I do. I run programs and individual coaching. So we have, I guess the scope of the work that I do is things like organisations contacting me and getting me to do big programs, to maybe leadership programs for their whole executive team or their whole, leadership group. These programs I run in blended learning environments where we do partially online things plus group coaching, and then there's individual one-on-one coaching. So there's a whole range of ways people can work with me. There's a lot of options for it. I find that the group coaching is quite popular because it gives people, I guess, some people really like to work in groups and they get a lot out of group work. And one of the lovely things about group coaching is that as the group kind of grows and develops and the people get more comfortable with each other, you create this lovely dynamic environment where they're coaching each other and sharing their experiences. So I run an example, a 12-month leadership program, which is basically just 3 people plus me each year. And we spend 12 months really deep diving into all things human. And at the end of it, people just end up with such an amazing bond. They have reunions all the time. I'm going to one next week, which is, we just want to keep hanging out together because it's been so much fun. And it's a sort of, so some people really want one-on-one. They really work better in a one-on-one environment, and other people prefer to work in small groups. So I've sort of basically adapted what I do so we can do it in any format that works for people.
Do you have a particular focus on women or working with everybody?
I do focus on women. I have male clients simply because of the number of males there are in very senior roles as opposed to women. So, there are certainly quite a few male clients. But I guess my focus on women has kind of developed over the last, probably the last 3 or 4 years, where, again, the whole piece around understanding how humans tick. I started doing some research into tribal leadership and how tribes behave. And that kind of, again, was a huge light bulb moment for me where I went, this is the thing. And looking at that through this lens of how men behave in tribal settings and how women behave in tribal settings and what the different leadership looks like through the masculine lens and the feminine lens led me to do more program type work and develop more offerings for women, because it answered a lot of the questions for me around why, for example, a woman can be at the leadership table and behave in the same way as a man at that leadership table, and she will get labelled as bossy, ambitious, too loud, too opinionated, too something, and a man will not carry those labels. So things like that started to come out for me, that sort of sense of actually it looks different. When women use that masculine leadership style, that's what happens for them. And how do we actually rethink the way that women lead to lead in a much more natural way, that, feminine way that women like to lead in? And I had a wonderful example. I interviewed, so in doing this research, I had initially about 500 people complete an assessment for me, and then I followed up with interviews. So I talked to hundreds of women. One of the women that I remember speaking to has a women-only business, not by design, but just simply because the way she structured her business seemed to attract women and not men, unsurprisingly, when I understood what she was doing. And for her, she explained it to me that even as her being the CEO, she doesn't feel like a CEO. She's just, one of the collective. And she's created this amazing collective of women. They're speech pathologists. And she said, what happens when somebody can't make it, because a lot of them work part-time because they've got family responsibilities. If someone's child gets sick and they can't come to work, they call up and everybody pitches in and takes over that person's patients for the day. But there's no feeling of you owe me. You owe me now because I looked after your client on Wednesday, so you owe me, one for next Friday. But it's just this feeling, how do we just serve our community in this way that's, connected and beautiful? And she said she doesn't feel any sense of hierarchy. Everybody in the team gets equal airplay, I guess, equal space in the team. And she said for some reason, and again, it was obvious when we started talking about it, she said she'd interviewed men and she'd actually offered men jobs, and she said they never last. Or they turn the job down before they start once they realise what we're about, or they come in and they kind of go, oh, I can't work like this, because, it's sort of more in the male nature to have hierarchy and to have, sort of command and control and know who's at the top and understand how the hierarchy works. Whereas women don't seem to feel the need for that. They seem to work very collectively rather than in a pointed hierarchy. So it's just curious. And it's not a gender construct. It's just simply, different ways that brains work. But understanding that and really starting to dig into that was what drove me more into working with women. And particularly at the moment around women in confidence and dealing with things like imposter syndrome, dealing with being heard, having a voice, particularly for women at the executive table who aren't listened to and aren't heard or are shut down in some way. We do a lot of the work that I do at the moment is focused around things like helping women with scripts for when things like that happen to them. So, for example, it's happened to a lot of women, a lot of people tell me this, is they've said something, put forward an idea, and that idea has been ignored. And then a few minutes later, a man will say the same thing, the same idea, and everyone will go, oh, my goodness, what an amazing idea. And then the woman's left feeling like, did they not hear me when I said it? Should I have been louder? Should I have been more forceful? And then how do I recover from this position where everybody thinks that this guy has now had a great idea that was mine? And so things like creating scripts for them and giving them things that they can say in the moment so they don't have to sort of struggle around going, what do I say? It's just, here's the script, you say this. And things like that. It's been it's certainly a fun journey. It's one of those things where, when I talk to women about this, they're like, oh, my God, that happens to me all the time. So there's a lot of shared experiences that women have in corporate world and also in, academia and places like that, so it's not unique. It's something that's fairly common to a lot of women, this space of how do I be heard, but in a way that's not aggressive and not bossy and not pushy, but a way it's almost like holding quiet power. This sense of power and attention. I can command attention without having to be, too much in people's faces. And that's what most women really want. They don't want to have to go, thumping board tables and yet shouting at people. That doesn't work for women. They don't want to do it.
I put a post on LinkedIn about an hour ago talking about this very thing, because I did a webinar last week about women being interrupted in meetings. And so I had some suggestions about how people should perhaps speak a bit more loudly, board, choose where they sit at the table in meetings. And one of the comments I got, which really surprised me, was, but I don't want to be like a man. And so in my LinkedIn post, I said, well, is it being like a man to speak more loudly? Is it being like a man sitting in a particular place? Being like a man to speak more slowly? Or is it just increasing the different ways that we have of being, and that men perhaps can speak more softly, or choose that we've just got more choices? So I'd like to hear your perspective on that.
Yes, you don't have to be like a man. That's the thing, is that's what women have been forced into, is feeling like in order to be a successful leader, I have to emulate what I see as role models. And quite often the only role models are men. So I'm looking at that and thinking that's successful leadership. That's what leadership needs to look like. And it doesn't need to look like that for women to be successful. And you're right, it's not about being the loudest person in the room necessarily. It's about how you say it and where you say it and the nuance of your voice. Actually, interestingly, I've been doing some voice training recently because I've been getting a bit croaky and straining my vocal cords, mainly because I use my facilitator voice, which is really loud. And the vocal coach said to me, and we did a bit of practice on this, that it's not about being louder, it's about pitching your voice in the range that resonates the best with the human ear. And she actually taught me how to do it. And I used it the other day when I was facilitating, rather than when I had to bring the room back. I had a whole group of about 27 people, I think, and they were all talking really loudly off doing activities. When I had to bring them back, normally I'd shout and I then end up feeling kind of strained and croaky. And I just tried this thing of just changing the pitch of my voice and saying it, so the same volume but just a different pitch, and it was amazing. It just, the whole room kind of just stopped what they were doing and turned around.
And was the pitch higher or lower?
For me, it was. It's not a different. For me, it's not different. It's just basically making it more nasally sounding. For me,
so more resonance in the front of your mask. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and she actually got me to practice quacking, because apparently quacking is the best way to do it. Quacking like a duck, or talking like Donald Duck, or something like that. Yeah. And it was quite funny. I had a bit of a play with it. It was really good. And then I used that sense of being able to now crack the quack without having to quack. Although I'm not discounting the fact that if I really need to get people's attention, I might quack at them just just to get them to listen. But it was amazing. Like normally, like I said, I would have shouted, and it was just shifting the pitch of it. So she calls it twang, and she said it's just getting a little bit more twangy, because she got a spectrometer and she actually got me to speak and measure the pitch of my voice, and she said it just needs to be more twangy, and making it more twangy, shifted it into that basically the resonant space that the human ear is attuned to.
I want to go back to something you said before about the fact that at the moment, what works for men is to have very hierarchical structures, and what works for women is to have very flat structures. So how can we move into structures that accommodate both those ways of being?
It's interesting, and it's one of those things again about human instinct, is that we have a built-in instinct around hierarchy. We expect it, and we look for it when things are going badly for us. So when there's a crisis or when there's something going on, people look to the leader for guidance. It's like, what do you want us to do? But in time, when times are good and when times are abundant, there's not, people don't have as much of a need for that. So what we see in tribes, and there are some country cultures which are quite masculine and some that are quite feminine, but what we see in a lot of tribes, even to this day, is this sense that, men do what men do, which is, again, quite hierarchical, and it comes back to what they do. So if men are going out hunting, they've got to be highly skilled, and the men who become leaders are generally highly skilled hunters or warriors, depending on whether they're a warlike tribe or, where they spend most of their time hunting. So what happens in that world is you're only as good as your last hunt. So if something goes wrong for you on that hunt and you miss the deer and the tribe goes hungry, the tribe only puts up with that for a couple of weeks until they get to the point where number two shoves you off a cliff, probably literally. You're out hunting and, oh, my goodness, he fell off a cliff. So, whereas women, when they operate together and, women are back in the villages and they're caring for children, they're caring for elderly, they're doing different sorts of work. And what happens for women is that women will become leaders in that space because of, again, the skills they've got. But it's a very different thing happens when they don't need it anymore. So just say a woman becomes the leader because she's highly skilled, maybe she's a midwife or she's a healer. And there comes a point when the tribe doesn't need that skill anymore. She just absorbs back in and then somebody else steps up. And it's just dependent on the need of the tribe. So leadership will shift and change. It's like a dance rather than a hierarchy. So it's much more flat, but it's certainly spaces for leaders, but people kind of step up and step down and step up and step down. So it's just an interesting way to view it. I got quite a lot out of reading about Native American tribes, because that's how they traditionally did leadership, from the reading that I did, around that sense of, whether you're male or female didn't matter. It was about what the tribe actually needed. And there was a really fascinating piece that I read where the researchers asked the tribes people, they said, what would happen if you had an ineffective leader? What would you do about it? And apparently they were all really puzzled, and they're like, well, we just wouldn't follow them. And you kind of look at it and go, if only that happened in corporations, imagine what that would be like, Ineffective leader, we just stop following them. And so because of the way organisations are set up, and this goes back to the Industrial Revolution, and when people left their families and they left their home and they went to a place called work. And when that happened, women weren't there. It was men who went to work and women didn't. So the whole way we do work in Western society has been designed by men for men because they were the only ones who were there. So there's no blame in this. It's just how it happened. And then women didn't enter the workforce until after, in any significant numbers, until after World War II. And
or probably during World War II.
During World War II, yes, sorry.
When the men were off at the front, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember even when I was in my early working career, I must have been about probably 18 or 19, so it would have been the late 1980s. I spoke to a woman I was in the Commonwealth Public Service, and I spoke to a woman who was probably in her 50s, and I asked her, just getting to know her, how long have you been in the public service? And she said, this is my second time. And I said, and she said, yes, when I got married, I had to leave.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, so she got married, and she said her last day of work was the day before her wedding date. And then once she married, she wasn't actually allowed to be a public servant anymore. And that didn't change for years. And that was only the generation before me. So, women haven't been represented in the workforce in large numbers until really probably my generation.
There's a very big gap between having the organisations as we know now that are very hierarchical, and for example, the way that you're describing Native Indians work. Getting from one to the other sounds to me like a very long journey.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there's so much that's built into the way that corporations work today in terms of salary, in terms of, in terms of our whole society is based around that.
And when you think again about the public service as an example, when I started in the public service again in the late 80s, we were only just recently before that moved away from the system of people being promoted based on length of service to people being promoted on skills and merit. And it was a relatively new concept when I started in the public service, the idea of merit promotion rather than tenure. So we have, decades and decades of that's the way work was. You started work somewhere in a corporation on the shop floor at age 14, if you were a young fella, and you swept the floors for a couple of years, and then you got a promotion and you gradually worked your way up depending on how long you've been there. And at 65, they gave you a gold watch and a big send-off. And that's just the way that worked for so long. We're in this sort of whole new world of, women in the workplace in larger numbers and new generations coming through that want to do things differently. And I think remote work is a huge catalyst for a whole range of changes. I really do think that. I think that COVID shook the world of work in a really significant way that probably hasn't happened before. This idea that all of a sudden we had to adapt and do things really differently, and people are finding that it's working for them, which just goes to show that we can completely disrupt the way we work and it'll still figure itself out. It won't fall apart just because we've done something completely different. And in talking to women about work and how things work for them and don't work for them, there's a really big feeling from most women that we need to redesign the way that organisations, the way everything happens in the world of work. And it's about how do we bring men into that conversation, have a conversation about how do we make it work for everybody. Because we know from research that we get better results in business when women are at the top table. Women where there's equal representation of women on boards, those organisations have better financial performance. It takes the two different types of brain at the table to be successful. It's not let's get rid of the men and only have the women. You need to have both. And you need to have them both equally represented. But more than that, it's more than the numbers and the head count. It's about, do they have equal voices? Are they equally as respected and equally heard at the table?
And so you were saying before that women need to find a quiet power. How do they find that? What sort of things do you work with them on to find that sort of quiet power?
A lot of it, the work sort of starts with women's confidence and how women feel about themselves and being a woman in a, particularly in male-dominated environments, how that feels for them, because they've got layers and layers of societal issues to unpack here, going right back to small children. I was reading a really interesting piece of research about children doing maths tests, and what happened with the children doing maths tests is when they didn't write their name on the maths paper, they just did the paper and handed it in to be graded, boys and girls did equally as well on maths tests. But if they asked everybody to write their name and their gender on the test before they did the test, the girls did worse.
That is amazing, especially for maths.
Absolutely amazing.
There should just be there's an answer.
Yeah. But it's that perception. As soon as they were reminded of their gender, reminded that they were a girl by having to write that on the maths test, immediately what clicked in for them is girls are no good at maths.
Mm.
It's crazy, isn't it? It really is crazy. So all this stuff needs to get unpacked. But for women, a lot of it, we start with this confidence piece around, are you clear about your value?
Mm.
And can you articulate that value to people? And it comes down to that, again, it's an old piece of research, but, proven to be true over many different iterations of it, that women will only apply for a job when they feel 110% qualified, whereas a man will chuck his hat in the ring at about 75%. Mm-hmm. They'll look at it and go, yeah, I can do most of that. And women will look at it and go, if I apply for it and I'm not 110% there, I'm going to be, I'm going to fail. So there's a lot of that to unpack, which is around, do we understand our value and how to articulate that to other people? Then there's a piece around building visibility. And this is about women being seen and heard and taking their place at the table and owning that space and not being intimidated and not allowing, like the work you do, teaching them, how to speak up if a man's, taken their idea. How do you deal with that in a way that's graceful and powerful and not seen as bitchy or complaining? And then there's the piece around how women use strategic networking and politics inside organisations. So understanding how politics work and who the key influencers are and how to create good relationships with them and how to get things done through that unspoken hierarchy that exists inside organisations. So it's kind of like a multi-step process in working with women, but it starts with the confidence, then it's, it kind of builds from there. We always start with confidence because every woman who comes to me has that as a root issue. They come for other reasons, but it tends to be the root issue of it all.
I find the same thing. I find women come to me wanting to learn about public speaking or be able to speak up. And then we end up just dealing with confidence. And then somehow miraculously their public speaking gets far better.
I know. It's amazing.
You don't even actually have to work on the public speaking. It's just once they've got the confidence, then they're good at public speaking. They're able to step up and speak. It's amazing.
Yeah. I coached a client to ask for and get a $30,000 pay rise. Mm. And when she came to me, she was, she wanted to quit because she felt so undervalued and, she discovered that the rest of the executive team were all getting $30,000 more than she was and she was out of there. Mm. And I said to her, would you stay if you got the money? And she said, oh, yes, of course I would. I love this job. So it's like, why don't you ask for it? And she was like, asked for it? And it just hadn't occurred to her. And that's, again, a confidence issue. But it's the, first of all, build the confidence to ask it, but also the script so that you know what to say when you go there. Sort of stuff about do your market research, figure out what your job's actually worth, go with the evidence, go with all the accomplishments that you've had in the last 5 years, all that kind of stuff. But the main block is not that piece. The main block is the confidence, asking in the first place. And she asked for it and she got it and she was absolutely blown away.
Do you have any other... another example of somebody that you've coached who has just completely taken off? Is there anyone that you can think of?
Wow. I've got a few. There's been an amazing woman that I've been working with in one of my group programs called Emerge. It's, very long story short, but it's basically, again, those same three things, that confidence, the visibility, the connections piece. And she is working... she has been working in a not-for-profit organisation here in Australia. Quite happy, reasonably happy in her job, but still sort of feeling like she should be doing more and having more influence. And there are many more things she wanted to do and she was being quite constrained by her job. So in working with her, what came out is she really actually wanted to run a consulting business. She wanted to be consulting so she could pick and choose the projects and work on things that were passion projects for her. Through the Emerge program, she started her consulting business, and the very, very first thing she pitched, she won, and it was consulting to the United Nations.
Oh, my goodness me.
No. I was like, this is the kind of thing that you wait years to do. And she rang up and she said, so I've got a contract with the United Nations.
That is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. So she was brilliant. Look, I've got lots. I've got another lovely woman who started off when she came to me, she was she'd been through a lot of stress in her working life and she'd taken some time out and then she'd gone back into a pretty low-level job and again got to the point where she's like, I just need more than this. It's doing my head in, not using my talent and my skill. But for her, again, confidence was what got in the way. It's like, I haven't been a senior leader for years and all I am is this, little person who answers the phones. And she'd lost her belief. So she was caught in this horrible push-pull of wanting to do more and feeling so constrained that she couldn't do any of it. And again, through the Emerge program, working with her, this job kind of appeared in the paper and she was like, this is my dream job, this is the thing, but I don't think I'm going to be able to apply for it because confidence. So it was coaching around building the confidence to apply, getting ready for interview, all that sort of thing. Absolutely nailed the job. And she's heading up a not-for-profit here in Tasmania and loves it. Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Mm. Yeah. Mm. So there's so many success stories, but it's like you've discovered, a lot of it just comes down to this confidence piece, like, busting through all of this, because it's partly nature and partly nurture. It's a lot of women have quite high levels of perfectionism, which is that sense that I need to be perfect or I can't try because I'm going to fail. And then there's the nurture piece of all of these layers of societal expectations and the way that women are conditioned to believe that there are things that we can't do or shouldn't do.
Ros, I wanted to ask a few questions about you. I wanted to ask you, what was the worst time in your life?
Worst time in my life. I went through a incredibly difficult time when I was young, a young mother. So I got married really young. I was 19 when I got married and I had children fairly early. So I had children when I was about 21, 22. And my marriage broke down when my youngest was 2. And I had a very difficult relationship with the children's father. So he ran off one day and left us in an enormous pile of debt, which I wasn't really aware of the extent of until, bailiffs came knocking on the door wanting to repossess them.
My goodness.
Yes, it was really challenging. My lawyer called it sexually transmitted debt. So I had a number of years of paying back the debts that had been accrued and dealing with things like he'd taken out a second mortgage over our house and forged my signature. And I didn't know about this. And then when I went to the bank to view the papers and I said, look, this clearly is not my signature. And they said, it's not a fraud case because he's your husband.
Oh, my goodness.
When you were the marital issue, this isn't a fraud issue. If it was somebody you weren't married to, it would be a fraud issue, but it's a marital issue and there's nothing we can do about it. So, it took years and years to pay down the debt and get out of the issues that I had with him. And, it was a very, very difficult time, a very, very difficult time in my life. I was raising 2 young children. I went back to work straight away because obviously I needed to work and it was just really hard raising 2 kids and working flat out and all the time sort of wondering if I was going to have to get a second job or a third job to help pay the debt. And it was really challenging because he kept sending debts to us. Like he kept using my address and kept, and at one stage he went bankrupt and the bankruptcy people tried to take the house from me. And it was only because I was able to prove through bank statements that I've been paying the mortgage for 7 years or something at that stage. Because I couldn't divorce him because I couldn't find him. It's one of those things about divorce. You have to be able to find somebody to serve divorce papers. So, the fact that I was still married to him when he went bankrupt, they rocked up to my place and went, we're taking your house. And that was an incredibly difficult time. So, I had a lot of challenges fairly early on in my early adult life, I guess. Worked through it. That's probably, that and having had cancer. But really, when I sort of think back on it, that was probably the worst for me because of how protracted it was and how much stress it was and how long it went on for.
And what did you learn out of that?
For me, it's about the fact that I made it through. We can deal with the most difficult of circumstances. And I know there are a lot of people who've had it a lot worse than I have. So don't get me wrong around that. But it really is this, for me, the learning was about the strength of the human spirit, I guess, and the way that people can deal with really difficult things in their life and come out the other side and have a success story at the end of it. The other thing that it taught me is that you're not stuck with what you get. it would have been quite easy to kind of, I guess one example of that was I did the sums, I was $14 a week worse off by going to work than I was if I'd stayed home and collected the single mother's pension. But that would have been the easy option. So it's that sort of sense of you can work your way through whatever's thrown at you. You can turn it around. It's not your lot in life. It would have been quite easy to sort of go, it's all too hard. I'll just collect the pension. I'll get a bit more money anyway. Maybe I'll sell the house, move into council-provided housing, that sort of thing. But I didn't do that because it wasn't in me to do that. But it was very much that sense of you can come through anything. And I had a young lady working for me a number of years ago now who came to me as a trainee, and she'd been through the most horrific things in her life. She confided in me about some of the things that had happened to her as a very, very young child. It was absolutely horrific what had happened to her. When she started working with me, she was in a partnership with somebody who was actively using and selling drugs, and she came from a background where that sort of thing was normal. And she completely turned it around. She ditched the boyfriend. She, worked really hard. She completed her traineeship. She won the trainee of the year that year for Tasmania.
Fantastic.
Went on to get, married and have children and, buy a house and all of that sort of thing. So just that story, and I guess mine in a small way as well, sort of really, for me, really cements this idea that we're not stuck with what we're born with, or we're not stuck with what happens to us. It's just something that happened to us. It doesn't create who we are.
And Ros, can you think of what was the best time in your life?
Well, I've had lots of best times in my life, I think. There's two things that sort of sit for me as the things that I really love the most. One is spending time with my whole family, which is quite difficult because we're kind of all over the country at the moment and COVID's not been easy, but getting everyone together for Christmas, that always is up there as the best times in my life. But the other one for me is when we travel. We travel and we have adventures and we see incredible things and we go to amazing places, and it's that sense when we're travelling, you wake up every morning with this sense of excitement and what are we going to see today? And, new people, new places, new experiences, new things, and just building, I guess, that, the world's an amazing place. It really is. It's an incredible place. There's so many interesting things to see and great people to meet. And those are the two things that really light me up, is time with family, but also travelling.
Yeah, I can see, just seeing your face, how much they light you up. And the two questions I ask at the end, the first one is, being a woman, has that had an impact on your life, positive or negative? And what does it mean to you to be a woman?
In a work sense, I've had times in my life where being a woman has been quite negative at work. I've worked in very male-dominated environments, so I spent a fair bit of time in the energy industry, which is very male-dominated. And I've certainly had my career constrained by that, by the fact that I was a woman in a lot of cases. I remember having somebody very senior in the organisation say to me once, "You will never get to be a senior manager because you don't have a degree." And I was looking at all the senior managers who have got trade qualifications, they're being in the energy industry, electricians and people like that. And I'm like, why are you telling me I need to have a degree? So I went and, got one just to prove the point. But, I got held back in my career because of that. It was that, I remember when I got my first senior manager role, I won at fair and square an interview, and they sat me down and said, "We can't give it to you at full pay because it's too big a jump to go from a level 6 to a senior manager level 1 was too big a jump, because it went level 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, then senior manager." And even though I won the job on merit in the interview, and they said they couldn't pay me at full pay because nobody had ever done that before. And they started, so I had to take an annual step up. So I went to get level 7 in the first year, then level 8, level 9, level 10, finally senior manager. So 5 years of earning less than I was entitled to because of that.
My goodness.
So things like that. So anyway, but there's also, again, lots of positive things about, being a woman. I think coaching has been something that being a woman has really, I think, benefited me in that space. I know that there are lots of very, very good male coaches out there, but I've certainly found that other women open up more comfortably to a woman. So I think I've had much more effective coaching relationships with women than perhaps I might have done if I'd been a man, for sure. Interestingly enough, I find that men also open up to women as well. So there's that. I certainly wouldn't change it. You know, it's not something where I kind of think my career was terrible and I wish I'd been a man because I wouldn't have had those experiences. It's all been a journey and it's all been something I've learned an enormous amount from.
And my last question is, if you've got a message for the people who are listening, what would that message be?
I think I'll go back to what I was saying before about your circumstances don't define you, your past doesn't define you, your present doesn't even define you. It really is, you can make whatever it is that you want out of yourself. I know lots of people who've come through very difficult circumstances and to completely turn it around and change their lives. And it's doable for everybody. We just need the right tools and the right encouragement.
Ros, I come away from this interview just so impressed by your depth of your research and the depth of your knowledge that you bring to your coaching. And I feel when I speak to you that there are so many issues I could be speaking to you about, and that there is so much experience and knowledge that you're bringing to this conversation. So I think that just really needs to be acknowledged, and I think your clients are very lucky to have you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
And so thank you for your time.
No, absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. Had a lovely chat.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Brave New Women. Certain podcast sites such as Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts or Podchaser let you leave a rating and a review. The more ratings and reviews we get, the more people will listen and the more these women's stories will be shared. So I'd really appreciate it if you could. Thanks for listening.